So one of the common areas that people look to an awful lot when fearing slices or over-the-top patterns is creating more depth in the backswing. Now, what do we mean by depth? Well, depth really refers to how far the hands or the handle travels behind you relative to your body in backswing. So, for example, on the left-hand side here, if we simply drew this line just on the front of the pelvis, depth per se would be anything that goes behind that line. Shallowness would be anything that stays in front of that line. And we got to be very, very careful of those phrases in golf swing because they can mean different things to different people. But what we're really talking about is the hand or the handle depth. So how far the hand or the handle moves behind the player in the backswing position. And we have the same player here, left and right. And this is actually in a live session. The player on the left-hand side, as they were moving down, we saw that path upwards of 5, nearly 6 degrees to the left-hand side. The player would then open the face relative to that path and hit somewhat of a straight push fade in terms of what was occurring. So we'd have a ball that either starts straight or even slightly to the right and then fades away from that launch direction. So we wanted to improve that. We wanted to get that be a little bit more consistent. So how did we do that? Well, when we looked at the player on the left-hand side, we're looking at these values. Handle path, F basically refers to the hands moving more forward from their address position where they are at setup, and a B would be the hands moving more back from where we were at setup. We also have the thorax or the chest rotation value, O meaning open, meaning the chest is more pointing to the left of the target, and a C would be closed, meaning the chest is more pointing to the right of the target. So C would be more representative as the player starts going into backswing, rotating that chest more away from target, let's say. So when we're looking at these two values, let's just play this player on the left-hand side. Again, same player, left versus right. So if we kind of go very, very slowly into the swing on the left-hand side here, start working this player back, we also have the hand path and club path in terms of just the visual tracers of those actions. So you can quite clearly see early on with this player, the hands moving very much out and away from them very early on in that first phase. We nearly see that handle path number be nearly under 16 centimeters, meaning the hands have moved 16 centimeters further away from the player than they were set up. Now, generally speaking, when we see players, normally that value will come in at about 3, 4, 5. We do see the hands move slightly further away. For the majority of players, we can see it a little bit the other way, but generally down, a little bit out, we see early on, but maybe not to the extreme of 15.83, so just under 16 centimeters away from the player. So already that player has, let's say, let themselves down the pathway, perhaps lack of depth just from how they moved early on. We still see rotation in the chest there when we look down here, about 25 degrees. So where they started, again, going back just under 7 to 25, they have rotated 32 degrees by the time that shaft gets to parallel. But as we continue into that top of that backswing position, we get into their top of the backswing position right here, and we see just 73 degrees of chest rotation. Generally speaking, a guideline of about 90, but that wouldn't really be very important. It would more be reflective of where the handle is. When I see that chest rotation value of 73 degrees, I would expect to see the handle or the hands more higher, less depth in the backswing. If I saw a good depth of the hands with only 73 degrees of chest rotation, I would be very suspicious of how the players actually achieved that. They've probably done that by just simply pulling the arms more across the chest rather than as opposed to creating the depth more through rotation, more as a resultant of good movement as opposed to just creating that value by itself. So by simply pulling the arms across the chest, you could then create the depth, but you'll be doing it in an artificial manner. And for everything in golf, there's a cost of doing business. You might have to pay that cost later in transition or downswing. So when we look at this player on the left-hand side at the start of the session, yes, we really didn't have enough depth in the hands, in the handle. Therefore, on the way down, we would see this very much over the top action, that club head getting very much out in front of the hands early on in that first phase of that downswing. And you can see that club head very much outside the path. So the purple is the club head on the way down, outside the yellow hands, very quickly, very early on in that first transition, hence creating that leftward path direction. So we knew that was happening. Always, in any session, really, you're looking at the start of the session, what is the issue at impact between the club face, the club head travel, and the golf ball? And really for this player was the club head was traveling excessively left through impact, therefore requiring adaptations of the face, therefore creating the issues in the flight. Why was that happening? We really just simply didn't have enough time or depth in the backswing to really change how the club traveled down. So why was that happening? Well, we felt looking at this, again, looking at the values, there was an under rotation of the chest in the backswing hence the lack of depth through the hands rather than simply just looking at the hand. So over on the right hand side, the players are being given the guidance or the guideline, let's say, to rotate more through the chest and the pelvis. So to allow more rotation. Very importantly, that phrase was to allow more rotation in backswing, and then we'll get the resultant hand path. So very, very importantly, the player wasn't really told about the hand path in this situation. There wasn't a mention of get the hands deeper, get the hands more around you. That wasn't really discussed. It was really more, hey, can we feel like we rotate a little bit more better, or allow a little bit more rotation in that backswing, and then let's see what we get. So just allowing a little bit more rotation in that chest as we go back. Immediately as we kind of get to that position there, we saw earlier on when we had the hand path value of the player at the start of the session, nearly just under 16. We've already changed that by just 11.5 on the right hand side. So already a change in that. And again, similar-ish in terms of our rotation values, just under 27 on the right, just over 20, on the left, just over 27 on the right. So we've maintained the same rotation values. The hands have not moved out as much. So as we continue into that backswing on the left, we already know what's going to happen. What about on the right hand side? So as we continue into that backswing position, now that rotational value of the chest as that player moves and continues up, now up to 61. So that rotation of the chest is now starting to take over, let's say, to guide the hands a little bit more, or to allow the hands even to move a little bit more around, as before, where we very much have the hands still, if we take out those arrows, still 6.36 forward from where they started. You can see over on the right hand side and that number there, now 5.42 back. But again, the thorax rotation, the chest rotation value beginning to get much higher, much earlier. So as we go again on that left-hand side, right up to the top of the backswing, reach our maximum 73. What happens on the right-hand side? So we continue on the right-hand side. We're nearly at that same position much earlier in the swing. We keep going, we keep going, we keep going. We get over to 100 degrees of rotation. And then we see that big difference in the handle path value when you're looking at that just under 30 on the right-hand side, just over 7 on the left-hand side. And then if we just simply take all those kind of lines and all those numbers out there, and just from a visual perspective, just zoom in on those two positions, right versus left, we see very, very different position. You could do that kind of old line drawn from the handle down. Absolutely, you can kind of get that reference point, but I think it's quite clear in terms of the visibles. And then just that moving into transition on the right-hand side, as that player moves in, that yellow line being the hand path, the purple line being the club head path. And you see that lovely purple line now aligned underneath the yellow line. So the club head underneath the hand path on the way down, versus again going back to the left hand side, very much that purple line now moving out and on top of that yellow line. So that's the arrangement, the relationship we prefer not to have at that point in time. It will happen later. We just don't want it happening as early as that on the left hand side. So really with this player, that's in essence what we're trying to achieve. As with any lesson, you really are trying to improve, trying to change, trying to adjust impact, because that's the most important part of any golf swing. However, really to change that, you got to understand why there's an issue in the first place and what's the causation of that issue. Generally speaking, on the left-hand side, we didn't have enough depth in the hands, therefore the player didn't have enough space and time to really get that relationship between the club head handle, the club head itself, to organize better at impact. So over on the right-hand side, we're going to create that more depth, but we don't want to do it through a false way and just through a cheating way nearly of just pulling the hands in behind them. So when we're looking at these relationships in these backswing positions between hand depth, rotational values, chest, pelvis, sway, bend, all these different things happening at the same time, we got to be very, very sure that we're creating a really good relationship to get what we want, as opposed to just simply falsifying what we want. So again, on the left hand side, starting off, thorax rotation 6.5 degrees open as we work into that backswing. On the left-hand side, we go up top here. We see very, very glaringly the hands do not have enough depth for what we want to achieve. They are causing the issue. We look at the rotational value of the chest. It's just over 73 degrees. Over on the right-hand side, we change that. We allow the player to rotate more by simply just giving that instruction. Hey, can you allow yourself to turn better through that backswing position? Because of that better rotation, that improved rotation, that allowance of rotation, we then change the handle path, numbers and values, and change where the hand is. Because of that, because of allowing rotation, changing that handle position, we now change the relationship in transition between the hand travel path and the club head path, which then changes the delivery system at impact. So when you're looking at these values, again, always, or never, looking at a value on its own in isolation, always looking at what might influence it, handle path orientation, our position, is heavily influenced by rotational values and up and down, forward bend, tilts, etc. But what it isn't really trying to do is just falsify a movement by itself. So always, if you're looking for more depth, create it through improved rotation rather than just falsifying and pulling the handle further behind you.